You know that feeling when everyone's raving about the latest gardening trend, and you're standing there thinking, but does it actually work for real people? That's exactly how I feel when I hear composting gurus preaching that hot composting is the only way to go. Sure, it sounds impressive to tell your neighbors you're cooking up compost at 140 degrees, but let me tell you something I've learned after years of building soil at the soil house. Slow and steady doesn't just win the race. It creates better compost. I'm going to make a case today that might ruffle some feathers in the gardening community, but it's one I stand behind completely. Cold composting, that misunderstood method that gets dismissed as lazy or inefficient, is actually the superior choice for most gardeners. And I'm not just talking about convenience, I'm talking about soil quality, microbial diversity, and creating a composting system that actually fits into your life instead of demanding you reorganize your entire schedule around it. Let's get clear on what we're actually comparing here. Hot composting requires you to build a pile with specific carbon-to-nitrogen ratios, maintain adequate moisture, ensure proper aeration, and achieve a critical mass of at least 3 feet cubed. When done correctly, the pile heats up to between 130 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit, breaking down materials in as little as 3 weeks to 3 months. It's the composting equivalent of a pressure cooker. Cold composting, on the other hand, is beautifully simple. You add materials as they become available, maintain basic moisture levels, and let nature handle the timeline. The pile stays closer to ambient temperature, and decomposition happens through the gradual work of mesophilic organisms, bacteria, fungi, and invertebrates that thrive in cooler conditions. The process takes anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on materials and conditions. Now, before you think I'm advocating for cold composting just because it's easier, let me explain why slower decomposition actually produces superior results. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Hot composting kills things. Yes, that's partly the point. You want to eliminate weed seeds and pathogens, but in that sterilizing heat, you're also wiping out beneficial organisms that contribute to soil health in ways we're only beginning to understand. Cold composting maintains temperatures that allow a much broader range of microorganisms to thrive throughout the entire process. You're not just getting bacteria, you're cultivating fungi, actinomycetes, protozoa, nematodes, and countless other soil organisms that create a living ecosystem. These organisms don't just break down materials, they form complex relationships that continue benefiting your soil long after you've applied the finished compost. I've sent samples of both my cold and hot compost to soil testing labs, and the results consistently show that cold compost contains significantly higher populations of beneficial fungi. These fungal networks are crucial for plant health, helping with nutrient uptake, disease resistance, and water efficiency. When you apply cold compost to your garden, you're inoculating your soil with a diverse microbial community that's already accustomed to working together. Let's talk about something that'll change how you think about compost quality: nutrient loss. That impressive heat in hot composting doesn't come from nowhere. It's generated by rapid microbial activity that burns through organic materials quickly. And just like any fire, some of what you're composting literally goes up in smoke. Nitrogen, one of the most important nutrients for plant growth, is particularly volatile. During hot composting's high-temperature phase, you can lose up to 30% of your nitrogen content through volatilization. It escapes as ammonia gas, which is why hot compost piles sometimes smell strongly during the active phase. That's not just an odor, that's nutrients you collected leaving your pile and entering the atmosphere. Cold composting's slower process means organic materials break down gradually, with minimal nutrient loss. The nitrogen stays bound in organic compounds throughout the process, becoming available to plants slowly and steadily after application. This slow-release characteristic means your plants get fed over time, rather than getting a quick burst that might leach away with the next heavy rain. I've noticed in my own garden beds that areas amended with cold compost maintain their fertility longer between applications. The soil stays darker, richer, and more alive-looking throughout the growing season, while beds that received hot compost seem to need more frequent feeding. Now let's address the elephant in the garden, the actual work involved. Composting advocates love to gloss over this, but hot composting is legitimately labor-intensive. You need to turn your pile every few days during the active phase to maintain oxygen levels and ensure even heating. Miss a turning session and your pile can go anaerobic, creating foul odors and slimy conditions. You're also on a strict ingredient schedule. You can't just add kitchen scraps whenever. You need to collect enough materials to build your pile all at once. This means storing materials, attracting fruit flies in your kitchen, and probably annoying your family members with containers of rotting vegetables taking up counter space. Cold composting works with your life instead of demanding you reorganize around it. Vegetable scraps from dinner, toss them in. Fall leaves from raking, add them whenever. Weeds from your morning garden session, they go right in the pile. You're composting in real time, as materials become available, without the pressure of maintaining specific ratios or turning schedules. The occasional turning of a cold pile, maybe once every few months, helps speed things along slightly, but it's not critical to success. I turn mine when I remember, or when I'm already working nearby, not because the process will fail without it. I know what you're thinking. But what about weed seeds and plant diseases? This is the argument hot composting enthusiasts always pull out, and honestly, it's overblown for most home gardeners. First, proper cold composting still kills many weed seeds and pathogens through the natural antagonistic action of soil organisms. The diverse microbial community in a cold pile includes organisms that actively suppress pathogens and consume weed seeds. It's not instantaneous sterilization, but it's effective biological warfare happening at a microscopic level. Second, you can manage this concern through simple practices. Don't add weeds that have gone to seed. Pull them before they reach that stage. Avoid adding diseased plant material to your pile, or at least bury it deep in the center where decomposition is most active. These are basic composting practices that apply regardless of method. Third, and this might surprise you, but some weed seeds germinating in your finished compost isn't actually a disaster. When you spread cold compost in your garden, it's usually applied as a mulch layer or worked into the top few inches of soil. Any weeds that sprout are really easy to spot and pull when they're just tiny seedlings. If you compare that to the weeds that will inevitably show up in your garden anyway, from seeds blown in by the wind or carried by birds, the composted weed seeds are honestly just a minor inconvenience, not a deal breaker. Here's an angle that matters more than we might initially think: energy efficiency. Hot composting actually requires a significant energy input, not from electricity, but from you. All that turning, monitoring, and rushing around to keep those temperature thresholds burns your calories and takes up your time. More importantly, the rapid oxidation in hot composting means carbon gets released into the atmosphere at a much faster rate. Cold composting, on the other hand, sequesters carbon more effectively because decomposition happens slowly, which allows more stable carbon compounds to form. These compounds become the foundation of soil organic matter that persists for years, continuing to improve soil structure and water retention. If we're composting partly because we care about environmental sustainability and reducing waste, then choosing the method that retains more carbon and requires less intervention makes philosophical sense. The final piece of the puzzle is what happens after your compost enters the garden. Cold compost contains more partially decomposed organic matter. You'll see recognizable leaf fragments, small twigs, and other materials still in various stages of breakdown. Some gardeners see this as a flaw, but it's actually a feature. These larger particles create air spaces in soil, improving drainage in clay soils and water retention in sandy soils. As they continue decomposing in place, they feed soil organisms throughout the year, creating sustained biological activity. Your soil becomes a living system rather than just a growing medium. Hot compost is more uniform and fully broken down, which looks nice and feels satisfying to work with, but it lacks those structural components that continue improving soil over time. Think of cold compost as a slow-release soil amendment that keeps on giving, while hot compost is more like a one-time nutrient boost. Let me share some practices that have made my cold composting even more successful at the soil house. First, I maintain 2 or 3 piles in rotation. While one is actively receiving fresh materials, another is resting and decomposing, and a third might be ready for use. This system ensures I always have finished compost available without rushing the process. Second, I'm thoughtful about layering. Even without strict ratios, alternating between nitrogen-rich materials like kitchen scraps and carbon-rich materials like dried leaves helps maintain good pile structure and prevents anaerobic conditions. It's not science, it's just common sense that makes the process work more smoothly. Third, I keep my pile moist but not waterlogged. In dry climates, this might mean occasional watering. In wet climates, it might mean covering part of the pile. Moisture should feel like a wrung-out sponge throughout the pile. Finally, I embrace patience. The beauty of cold composting is that you can forget about it for weeks or months, then come back to find nature has been working steadily the whole time. There's something deeply satisfying about this hands-off approach that aligns with how natural systems actually function. Look, I'm not saying hot composting is bad or that it doesn't have its place. If you need finished compost quickly for a specific project, or if you're processing large amounts of material from a farm operation, hot composting makes sense. But for the typical home gardener looking to sustainably manage yard and kitchen waste while building exceptional soil, cold composting is the clear winner. It fits into your life. It builds more diverse soil biology, it retains more nutrients, it requires less work, it's more forgiving of mistakes, and it creates a composting practice you'll actually maintain year after year because it doesn't demand perfection or constant attention. At the Soil House, we're all about working with nature rather than trying to force rapid results. Cold composting embodies that philosophy perfectly. Start your pile today with whatever materials you have available. Add to it as you generate waste. Give it time. Trust the process. In 6 months to a year, you'll have rich, dark, biologically active compost that transforms your garden soil. If this approach resonates with you, I'd love for you to subscribe to the Soil House channel, where we dive deep into practical, sustainable gardening methods that actually work for real gardeners. Share this article with anyone in your life who's been intimidated by composting or who's burned out on the demanding requirements of hot composting methods. Let's build better soil together, one slow pile at a time.